Welcome to the newest episode of All Things LOCS. Now, today we have a little bit of a different topic, but incredibly important for you guys to hear this, which is insurance. Now, I know that word, nobody likes it. It's not helping anybody. It hurts patients. It's, lowering reimbursements and increasing denials for, organizations. And then when we look at how much you pay versus what you get, it's not a benefit. Except today we're bringing on Katy Talento, and she's a benefits manager. She's going to be talking to us about how you can actually get rid of your insurance carriers. I know, crazy, right? Cut out the middleman and how to set yourself up in a way that not only gives your team and your organization better benefits, but actually saves you a ton of money in return. And in addition, she's also going to be talking about the importance of just owning your healthcare. And if you're on the patient side of it, of not giving your autonomy and your power away to the healthcare industry, but understanding how to reclaim your own health so that way you don't have to go to the doctor as often either. And this is what we're going to be covering on this episode. Catch you guys there. All right, Katy, let's get right into this. So, we had a great conversation when we were looking to get you on the show. And obviously you spent a lot of years in the government, highest levels of government. And, a lot of people would take that job, take that role and just say, this is my pathway. I'm going to double down. I'm going to really get into this. And you took a different route. You got to a point where you really took a major pivot. And I believe on the call, you even labeled your career as a fraud almost, which is, it's an interesting statement to make. But I would love to maybe get a little into the story of, all right, here's what I was doing in the government, and this is what made me leave, especially during the time period that you left, which is certainly an interesting one in our country's health history.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I think that I started life out as an infectious disease epidemiologist, and that is the part of the story that I think is the fraud. So I have increasingly woken up, I think, to not sure all the science is as advertised on that front. But anyway, so yeah, I came at this career not really wanting to work in government. I never wanted to work in government, and I kind of got drafted at various points. I was always escaping and then getting sucked back in, either by friends or the need of some senator or whatever. And even in the presidential race in 2016, it was really, I was trying to help a friend who was desperately struggling as a policy staffer for the Trump campaign. And so I've kind of always had this Republican relationship, really conservative relationship with government, in that, like, I didn't really respect government. I kind of thought it was bad at stuff and we should have less of it. And so I think that's, I always kind of was hoping, hey, maybe I'll get to like the productive side of the economy at some point. And I ran off to be a nun, like in the middle of my Senate career. And I just trying to escape, like government's so slimy and gross. And even though there are really good people in government, and I always had really good friends, really trying their best and who were good people in government, I always felt like this town is kind of corrupt, and I should do something better with my life. But I was good at it, and I had fun, and I liked the warfare that I was involved in. And so at the end of the day, I always kind of thought, well, America, so I guess I'll go do this thing again. And that's kind of how I kept getting in and out. And I ended up working for 5 different senators, and on and off, because again, I was in and out. But 5 different senators, and then eventually into the White House. And I left in middle of 2019. So yes, I missed the Super Bowl for infectious disease epidemiologists, I guess. But I'm very glad about that now.
You mentioned something at the beginning, and I don't want to dive into that pivot point at 2019, but if I heard you correctly at the very beginning about the data or the science not always being there, I think that's an aspect where you do see a lot, and I'm not bringing this up just because you see it on social media, but it's a big talking point of science and data versus opinions and hyperbole. What, from the standpoint of being in your career, what were you seeing on that end where you're like, I don't know if maybe all of our recommendations were the best based on the data and the science that were out there?
At that point in my career, I was not having these revelations. I wasn't leaving government because I was disillusioned with, the scientific enterprise. Quite the opposite, actually, not at all, in fact. So I think that, you know, ultimately, I woke up after I left, and that is kind of, I, that was a longer story, and it took me a minute to get there, but it was really watching Operation Warp Speed and watching some of the legal impacts of, well, if this drug works, then we can't have liability immunity for this product. And so, of course, we have to delegitimize these treatments that might work or at least partially work, because then we can't immunize this for-profit product. And seeing how the PrEP Act worked, and in conjunction with the emergency use authorizations on different products, as I watched that unfold the year after I left, it really got the juices churning, I think. And I had seen sort of the revolving door in Washington was obviously part of Washington. And President Trump had demanded that all of us take a pledge that we would not lobby for any industries, lobby the federal government for 5 years after we left his employ. And I actually meant that. I took that pledge and I kept it. But most people didn't. Most people left. They took the pledge and then they left and then they lobbied. And, I saw some things out there, and people that I had really trusted and relied on, like the FDA commissioner, who then went right onto the board of Pfizer and started, like, now we found out later he was bullying people at Twitter, to deplatform people challenging Pfizer's products. And I was really, really felt betrayed by that, because I liked him and respected him, and we'd worked together. And I felt like, oh, wow, did I have my eyes opened to so many things? It wasn't just the science, although certainly the science and how the science and the law interacted. Those were really, I think, the things that woke me up. And then I read Bobby Kennedy's book, about the public health enterprise. And he titled it The Real Anthony Fauci, but it wasn't really about Fauci. It was about the public health enterprise and how it interacts with both the global public health enterprise and the for-profit enterprise, pharmaceutical enterprise, and research and development enterprise, clinical trials, NIH. And I had been in charge of these things. I mean, I had worked on those issues my whole career, and he taught me so much, and it made me feel really stupid. Like, So I was really grateful to him, and I still am. And I actually wrote him an apology letter. I wrote him an apology letter because he was supposed to get a meeting. Well, he had gotten the candidate, Donald Trump, when he was still running, to commit to doing this vaccine safety commission when he was in office. So that was, during the campaign in 2016. And so then we get into office, and we're told, he starts calling, and he's like, hey, I want the vaccine commission. Like, let's do it. And we had to get rid of him, right? We can't have like a bunch of anti-vaxxers at the White House. And so I helped get rid of him. I called HHS and said, you guys meet with him, get him out of our, he can't come into the White House complex and with all this vaccine anti-vax talk. And so I feel like there were opportunities along the way where I was on the wrong side of the science. I fought really hard. I practically forced USA to spray DDT all over Africa. Like, they didn't want to. And I thought that they were killing kids by not doing it in the malaria control programs. We fought for years on that issue. And the story that I told myself that, like, I'm the hero of this story. I'm saving all these kids from these like crazy environmentalists. And so I think that I kind of woke up that there's the matrix, and we're all playing a role in the matrix, and we're all not getting the whole picture, and we're not exposed to the whole picture. And it's not intentional. We're not intentionally excluding ourselves from being exposed to things, but the systems that we're in, hide a lot of reality from us. And so I feel a lot of empathy for people in government who are trying to do the right thing, because it's really hard to know, and nobody's an expert in all the issues that they're in charge of. And so it's hard to know. And even I wasn't an expert in some things, and I got it wrong. So, ugh.
Hey, look, I will say, and I got to give it a lot of credit because this is, um, I hate to use the word epidemic, but I'll say I think some of sometimes I feel as if the biggest epidemic in this country is just the amount of people who will deny when presented with clear and obvious facts that present them with the other side, right? So it's okay to say, well, I got it wrong, but I realized it and I was open to changing my perspective once I was presented with new facts. So do you feel like we would all do a lot better if just a lot of people had that mentality instead of just sticking to our guns when presented with the obvious? But honestly, what you just described feels like the outside of, and we're gonna get into some good, good stuff here, but in general with healthcare and lay people, this is, I think, one of the biggest issues that I have is just what's going on behind the scenes? The recommendations that are being made, are they for my benefit or is it for somebody else's, pocketbook benefit? What do these studies look like? Why is stuff banned in Europe, but then we're okay to ingest it? So I think there's just a lot of, like you said, it's not a matter of ignorance per se. It's just, all right, we're not privy to what's fully out there. So it's almost, you got to like do the best you can, take an active role in your own healthcare. But to your point, it's like the system's just kind of set up like you don't, it's tough. It's tough to really know exactly what's going on. And this aspect of also, and this goes back to what you were saying about some people who took the pledge and reneged on it, is just how transparent and how authentic and honest are we in the healthcare atmosphere where, I think we have this viewpoint of everybody's in healthcare, at least, and I'm older now, so I get it, but when I was younger, I was like, well, we're here to help people or, help patients or help the people that we're signing policy for. And then you meet somebody like, you're not really in this for other people's benefit. And it's definitely frustrating. So you just do the best you can. And, I think the best you can now is, all right, you decided to leave. So I want to talk a little bit, before we get into the meat and potatoes, I want to talk a little bit about where your career went. So you left the government. What was the pivot point or for you to say like, all right, this is the next step in my journey?
Yeah, I just there were personnel changes at the White House, let's put it that way. Everyone's ability to make a difference and to fight battles and to win them at the White House or in anywhere in government is dependent on who you work for, who you report to. And my boss, who was wonderful and he was the head of domestic policy, he had been nominated to be an ambassador to wherever, and he left, and things were not the same after that. And so I stuck around to try to get as much done as I could. There were some projects like price transparency and a few pro-life issues or whatever that were needing to get over the finish line, and I worked really hard to kind of get those there before I left. But I think more than that, there were bigger powers at work. In that my sister was very sick. She was dying of colorectal cancer. She was 39. And and I didn't know she was dying at that point, but she was. And I had 6 months left with her. And I, am so glad that I wasn't in the White House during those 6 months because I mean, I barely saw my own kids. I definitely wasn't going to be the advocate she needed and the, sister that she needed. So I'm so grateful that I think a lot of events conspired around that time to get me out of where I was, and it was meant to be. So I'm very grateful that I left when I did. And now, like seeing, there was a little bit of FOMO when COVID first came up, because it's sort of like the Super Bowl for any infectious disease epidemiologist. And I was like, what? So I had a little bit of FOMO, but as I saw the year go on and how like it was getting weird, right, in terms of like what's really happening here, I became very, very grateful that my conscience was not tainted with the government response to COVID and I had nothing to do with it. So, I think there were a lot of things at play. And when I got out, I sort of looked around, and most people with my resume, they'll just go shill for industry somehow. And everywhere I looked in healthcare, it was just like apocalypse now. It was all corrupt and gloomy, and I didn't want to be part of it. And there was this one little like bright light of hope. And it was what was going on with some, a movement of innovative employers and their benefits advisors, who were putting together better plans and firing the carriers and firing the PBMs and unbundling plans and trying to rehumanize healthcare. And that was really encouraging and exciting to me. And so that is sort of I just followed the light. It was the very small light. It was the only one. Yeah.
Oh, good. I love the fact that you, it's a shift, and it's one that, a lot of people, you've been fortunate to, like you said, see some light at the end of the tunnel, see some people that are really trying to do good, and it's something that you could identify and, hang your hat on, so to speak, and say, I want to be part of that, versus a lot of people like, I kind of feel stuck. What do I do? It's something I see a lot of people in healthcare. It's just like, hate to say this, but it's a lot of complaining or just a lot of frustrations, I should say, but then there's no, what do I do about it, or what could I do about it? And it's just being able to, here's a solution for it. Now, you brought up, PBMs. I want you to maybe explain that a little bit, like some people, because I know we're speaking on this podcast to a lot of people in the private practice world. So if you can maybe explain like what you refer to them as bond villains, which I love. So maybe you could explain, all right, this is why you think that. And then overall the effect of the PBMs on maybe the private practice outpatient world. And
Well, a lot of people ask me who are the biggest bond villains. I've been lobbied by all of the industry sub industries, and I often will say it's the fake charity tax exempt hospitals and it's the PBMs. And so I do think that, do you want me to give a little bit of PBM 101? I don't want to.
we could, a little bit for some people out there saying, all right, I'm not really sure what it is or how it's affect me. So yeah, knock socks off.
Okay, so similar to insurance companies, PBM's value prop was, hey, we can go to the drug manufacturers and get better deals for you, employer, than you could get for your employees without us. And we're going to use the volume of all these employers and all of these patients to go extract, better discounts out of the pharma manufacturers than anyone could get themselves. That's sort of the value prop of insurers as well, equally fraudulent. And it seemed like a good idea. And, of course, we see this idea of like middlemen who get wholesale or volume discounts in every industry. You think about like a general contractor and housing or whatever. Of course, so it made sense. But then the way they extract that discount is a few ways. I mean, there are many ways, but the main villainy here is they said, okay, nice drug you got there. Be a shame if no one's formulary had the drug on it. So you're going to pay us a kickback to make sure that your drug gets on Blue Cross's formulary or Optum's formulary. And that would be fine, totally, if that kickback went to the employers, right? Because the purpose of hiring the PBM is so that you get these discounts, right? But the PBMs actually went to Congress and lobbied to get themselves out of the law that prohibited kickbacks in healthcare, which physicians are all too familiar with, which is why you supposedly can't own your own stuff and your own facilities and whatever. So, what's good for you is apparently not good for them. And so the PBMs, they got this exemption from the anti-kickback law. And so those kickbacks got rebranded as rebates, and they promised that they would, get these rebates from the manufacturers, and they would get these much better prices on drugs. But the rebates were not passed on to the employers. They were just pocketed by the PBMs. Not only is that just corrupt and gross, but also it means that how does the drug maker get the money that they need for the price of their drug when they have to give an increasingly bigger kickback to the PBM? Well, they raise the price of the drug. So the higher the drug, the bigger the kickback they can afford to pay to the middleman. And so what that does is it misaligns the incentive. So the PBM who's working for the employers, right, for the payer, is now being paid by the seller. And the higher the seller's price, the more the PBM gets paid. When, remember, the value prop was, I'm going to get you lower drug prices. So that is the fundamental, like, where it all went wrong, is that somewhere along the line, they were not required to pass on whatever price concessions are given by the drug manufacturers to the end buyer, which is the employer or the patient or the union or the taxpayer. Those are the four payers, actual payers in healthcare. So because of that, PBMs like shot up the Fortune 50 list in like 20 years ago, 25 years ago, no one had ever heard of them. Now they're like the most wealthy organizations in the country, and they have massive shareholders. And of course, that's where all the profit was. And so they got bought by the insurers in order to serve as a profit center. Where can we dump our like corrupt revenue schemes? Because the insurers were constrained by the well, a little bit by the market. They could only raise premiums so much, but also they were constrained by the ACA and by Medicare rules around how much they could charge and how much they could keep of in profit. And so the way to sort of, get out of this was to have another affiliated entity that we could do all our profiteering in. And so they would use the PBMs as like a profit center for a parent company. So that's why you have United Health Group owns Optum, and Aetna is owned by CVS Caremark, and Cigna owns Express Scripts. Blue Cross owns Carelon. And so these giant companies own, they control a little under 80% of the market. But unlike the carriers, there actually is competition in the PBM market, increasingly so. And there are small competitors that have come up differentiating themselves as honest. Like, we're the honest guys who are going to give you all the rebates, and we're transparent, and we're not going to screw you in this way. And so there are actually choices out there now that we don't see in the carrier space.
One major question, but all I'm thinking of my imagination's going as you're describing that whole scenario. I'm like, I don't know, man. It just sounds like legalized mafia. It's like the headquarters, like, where can I funnel the money? It's just, this is the crap that definitely pisses organizations off, patients off. From those last point you just made, though, about this, maybe the smaller PBMs that are starting to pop up, are you actually seeing any net positive effects so far with regards to the actual role that they're supposed to play, having a positive effect on the people they're trying to serve?
So I'll give you an example. I have two clients that are in the same industry. They're in different parts of the country, but they have about the same size employees, and they're in the exact same industry, okay? It's a nonprofit industry. And they just cover different parts of the country. One of them is using Optum Rx, and their drug prices went up by probably last year, I want to say 28%, or like high double digits, right? The other one, they fired their PBM. They had been with Express Scripts, and their drug costs went down by about the same, about 30% in 1 year. Yeah. And this is when the trend in healthcare costs are all going up. So even if you just like keep your costs flat, that's a massive win in the current environment that's being really, I believe, driven by AI upcoding. But when you have like reductions in cost, it's monumental.
30%, it's a lot. It's going to show up. We just talked to somebody a few weeks ago about just overall benefits, but it's just, also looking at, I think it's important too for somebody's listening. It's like, well, I don't really ever look at my benefits. And I think that's part of the challenge too, is like, this is kind of a line item in an organization. A lot of people just kind of brush aside, or it's like, well, I got other stuff to worry about, growing the business or something. It's like, meanwhile, you have this line item that you're paying a lot for, that you could, like you said there, it's like, you can make this little switch and potentially save 30% in this one area, but that's going to definitely show up. What, when me and you were talking and we were discussing a little bit of call it maybe the downfall of privately owned practices actually being owned by an individual, not owned by, private equity or a large hospital system or insurance companies now. What, I'm also curious to know, not necessarily what's driving that. I think there's a lot of mitigating factors there. Insurance is certainly one of them, right? They're paying less. They're doing more denials. I think a lot of people are privy to, they're familiar with what's going on with United Healthcare and the amount of denials they get from their AI-driven algorithm. But then even on some simpler things that, like, so I think you had mentioned maybe some anti-competitive provisions, such as not allowing practices to even take cash from their own patients. Like, is that something like, what are some things that maybe insurance is actually doing to private organizations aside of the denials and the reimbursements just going down that are really starting to hurt doctors and just chiropractors, anybody who really owns a medical practice at this point?
So as an employer, I have to, I'm an consultant and agent for employers, but so when I say I mean the employer. As an employer, I have to rent a network. So even if I fire Blue Cross or I fire Aetna, I still rent a network. I don't usually do a reference-based pricing plan, which a lot of docs and hospitals don't like for a lot of understandable reasons. And so our employers typically prefer to have a network on the plan. So we rent a network. Let's say it's a Cigna network or an Aetna network, whatever. And then we have an independent third-party administrator who processes the claim. So you, the doctor, send the claim to the independent third-party administrator. The TPA, the third-party administrator, sends that claim to Cigna or the network to reprice it according to their contracts, sends it back to the TPA. It gets paid by the employer. They reach into the employer's account and they pay that claim. So now, one would say, like, gosh, insurance contracted rates are kind of crappy. We're overpaying for them in a lot of cases, especially at hospitals. And so what if I want to go do my own deal with a hospital? I, the employer, want to just reach out to the local hospital in my town, and I want to have my own contract. And I just want to use my network as kind of plan B, right? I want to go around and have a bunch of relationships with doctors' practices, with independent labs, with imaging centers, physician-owned ortho centers and ambulatory surgery centers. I want to create my own little sort of custom network. But when I don't have a network, because I can't contract with every provider in the whole country, I want to have this network as my backup. So plan B. Well, my contract with that rental network, I have to have a contract with Cigna, and my TPA also has a contract with Cigna, and the providers, almost all of them, have a contract with Cigna, the hospitals, the doctors, the surgery centers. So all of us have contracts with Cigna or whoever, Aetna, United. And those contracts basically say, we're your plan A. We're not plan B. And you can't go cut better deals with each other and cut us out ever, unless maybe we approve it. So when you have when you're just renting the network and they're not running your plan, most people have a plan. Like if most Americans in the country that have a Cigna plan, you ask your patient, what's your insurance? They say Cigna. They mean that Cigna runs their plan. That's not the kind of plan we have. On a plan that Cigna runs, there's definitely no direct contracting, none of that. But I fired Cigna. I fired Blue Cross. I'm just renting their series of direct contracts. That's all a network is. I'm just renting access to those direct contracts when I don't have some other arrangement. And they're saying, well, tell me who your direct contracts are, and maybe I'll approve them. And you can only use them if I approve them. Why? Because that claim that you, the doctor, send goes to Cigna. They know what I'm doing and where I'm going. So it goes to Cigna first. And if they're out of network, then they send it to the TPA. And if it's their provider that they're contracted with, they put that contract price on and they send that to the TPA. Okay. So they want to have total control and not let us cut them out. And I think the only way to a post-network world is if more and more of us are building these custom networks. Okay. And ultimately, I actually don't think that direct contracts are the solution, as they're more of a transition to the solution. The solution is cash pay at scale. And so the solution is you have one price for everything, for every service you provide, and you compete on the basis of that price with other providers and, like every other industry. And so that's the world we want to get to. But right now, employers no one's competing on the basis of their cash price, because there isn't a cash pay market out there. There aren't payers who are paying cash. And the reason for that is TPAs are not set up to pay cash. And why should they get set up to pay cash? Because the network contracts don't allow them to do that. And they don't allow me, the employer, to do that. So the logistic challenges of not being able to pay cash, it is kind of hard. How do I even know the patient is going to you if I'm not talking to the patient and they're telling me so that I can pay you up front all in? It's logistically complicated to scale cash pay, but it's not impossible. And it can be done. I'm seeing it done in a variety of settings. But the real problem is these contract provisions, I would argue, illegal in the against their I would argue unenforceable anti-competitive behavior that violates the Sherman Antitrust Act, and that the DOJ and the FTC ought to be the DOJ antitrust division ought to be coming after these contracts as illegal anti-competitive. And so, because really what they're doing is they're saying, you doctor can't compete with my network for this customer. If you want access to this customer, you have to go through me. I'm the mafia. If you want to talk mafia, that's it. So nice practice you got there. Be a shame if you didn't get any Cigna patients anymore. So it would be, it's really important for, I think the government does have a role here to get involved. And DOJ has actually been engaged. The DOJ antitrust unit has been going after some anti-competitive network contracts. They've been going after different network contract provisions than the ones I just described to you. But they're also good. Like I'm really glad to see them. They've been going after hospitals that are engaging in like mafiosi tactic. And so I'm glad to see them doing that. I hope that they're paying attention to the things I'm writing, like, hey, look over here too. So I think that we may see some anti-competitive lawsuits, anti-competition lawsuits dropped the way we have seen with a few of these hospitals just in the past couple months.
No, I mean, and you just outlined a lot there. It's just, I think that's one of the biggest arguments too, is just how is it legal? Or, you turn around and say, well, it's kind of not, but then why isn't anybody taking the steps to actually correct it, especially when we look at the trickle-down effect of, all right, who's actually being really affected here? It's, the people that are running the healthcare organizations, but then the people that are getting the care are the ones that are getting really screwed. And you're definitely starting to see, and I'd like to maybe kind of touch on this a bit, you're starting to see a lot of, definitely a lot more cash pay in healthcare, especially on the independent practice side of it. What's your thoughts? And, we'll kind of get a little bit more to the cash pay itself, but what are your thoughts about somebody has all these, contracts with the Cignas and Aetnas, the world, so to speak, and they're saying, well, I don't know if I'm ready to maybe take the plunge into fully cash, or maybe I want to bring in some cash services, but I'm not, I'm not sure. It's like guaranteed business. What are your thoughts on being out of network with insurance as an option, as much as I know that is starting to shrink as well?
So what I would say is, if you're a doctor and you're contracted with a network, you're only required to use the network to send your claims to that network if you know that the patient's insured by that network. So if the patient never presents their ID card with that logo, then you don't know. So if their employer wants to pay you cash because it's cheaper and you're probably going to get paid more. I mean, that's the sad thing, is that like we're paying more to Cigna, you're getting paid less. And if we cut Cigna out, you could get paid more and we pay less. Like that's so everything's upside down in healthcare. But anyway, so like we like the providers, the doctors, hospitals, facilities that we directly contract with, like they love to contract with us because they get paid more. They get to keep a bigger piece of the total payment. And they get paid on time. And if they're being paid cash, which is increasingly happening, there's a little underground railroad being built around this. And I would say that the part of the underground railroad is that you don't look at ID cards. And so there are other ways to handle this. So there are vendors out there that help facilitate cash. And what they do is they provide a voucher for a patient. And so the employer pays, they get a voucher, the patient walks in with a voucher instead of their ID card. And that way, like you don't know anything about that they're a Cigna enrollee. And so you're not violating any contract. Yeah.
No, that works. If you're, for somebody who's maybe an independent practice owner and they're just what we said, like, yes, like everything's going up. And he said, if it's almost like going, I feel as if what you described of if you don't get any price increase, that's a win. It's almost like going, and I'm in Vegas, it's like going to the casino and walking out saying I didn't lose anything. That's a win. But if somebody's listening and saying, you're right, everything is going up. It's not just the insurance. It's, my malpractice, salary, like everything. And I want to create this, post network, so to speak, of not taking insurance. What do you think is like maybe the first step that they should take in a sense of also making sure they don't lose a lot of their current patient base?
So it needs to be a movement in your community, and it's not something doctors can do by themselves. Like they just can't. And I've seen many of them try, unless you're a primary care doc. And the primary care docs definitely can. They have to approach an employer and who would have the volume for them and enter into a direct contract to provide near-site or on-site care for their people. That definitely happens. Like we put direct primary care on all our employers and on all our employer health plans. And, we have DPC practices who they have a little bit too much volume than they want or that they can handle, but they don't have enough to hire their buddy out of the system who's been trying to get out, right? We come to them, we're like, we're going to make your day. You're going to be able to hire your buddy. And so that is great. That's great. But they were already DPC docs, right? Or, we know about the DPC. The specialists are where this is so difficult. And or like an imaging center or something where one employer is unlikely to give you sufficient volume, right? Unless it's the state employee health plan or it's the county health plan. I mean, like it depends if you have connections in that way. But again, trying to get like in order for a certain type of specialty to be carved out of a plan that is run by a network carrier, that employer is going to have to be some kind of ninja and legal wizard or have someone like me as their benefits advisor in order to make that happen. And that's rare. And so the way to think about this is the providers in a community need to come together with like the local chamber of commerce and start educating them about these issues or to invite speakers who can educate them about these issues. Because the only way this works in real life for the specialists is if multiple employers in that town get together and start to build this together with the provider community. And I know that doctors can't stand the word provider, but I mean doctors and facilities and imaging and blah, blah, and it's always great if you have an anchor hospital, like a community hospital that isn't owned by one of the giant conglomerate pretend nonprofit charity systems. Because yeah, exactly. It's always great if you have an anchor hospital because then you can truly fire the network, right? If you're an employer. If you've got a hospital system and you've got like at least one of each type of specialty practice and you've got a good little cadre of primary care, you're good to go. So, you can fire them and then you can have a network for outside of your market or just do reference-based pricing outside of your market or whatever. But it really has to be a movement, and that takes like education. So I know benefits advisors who have built this over time by having lunch and learns with local CEOs or local HR leaders that go on every month. They do this, until some tipping point happens. And like one of the big employers decides they want to do this. And, their three golfing buddies who are CEOs of smaller organizations say, hey, we'll join that health plan with you. And they build what we call a community owned health plan.
Super interesting. And I'm definitely starting to see that a little bit more, but to your point, I think it's also you got to want to build or join a community, so to speak. And this goes back to the beginning of our conversation, where it's just very easy to just look at everything that's going on, saying this is bull crap. We should be treated better, and it's not right, and this and that. And then to me, anyway, it just seemed like you kind of at least proposed, well, it might not be the fix all for everything, but at least it's a solution to what you're dealing with now. But it's going to take you to what you said, educating yourself, and then can you step outside of your own organization to, maybe, I don't say put difference aside, but play nice in the sandbox and, join up with other people in the community. Say, if we're really trying to build ourselves as the leaders in health in the community, are we actually willing to take the appropriate steps or do nothing about it and then just keep complaining? So, and it's right. So it's just, the solution's out there, guys. So if you're listening, it's like, what can I do? It's like, she just outlined like a pretty good step. And I know it's not something that's overnight. If I wanted to do this and I said, you know what, Katy, you got me pumped up and you gave me a solution that I didn't know existed. What do you think? I'm thinking maybe small town USA, but like normal time frame on being able to just from idea to, all right, we actually got this in the community now. How long does that normally take?
if everybody's on board and they just need to build it, it takes a year. I mean, you're just like, we got to get all the contracts in place. We got to fire the carrier at the end of the contract. And, figure out, hire a TPA, an independent TPA who's going to, basically apply all these contracts to the claims that get sent. So, you'll be sending your claims to the TPA from now on and not to the carrier network. And then you have to have the employers involved. They have to go through the stop loss actuarial analysis to figure out like how to do this themselves. And this is not that hard. I'm making it sound hard. It's not hard. Your benefits advisor will like get this done. But like a year is very ambitious. Typically it would be 2 years. But the only like the thing I would say about this is from a specialist perspective, it's not a 1 year process. That's only like if you have all the volume from all the employers ready to go, right? So, one other thing that I saw happen in that we're going to start working with, I think, more intentionally is 3 hospitals, one very large academic medical center and 2 other kind of less prominent hospitals in a community got together and formed their own network that they started offering to employers, and they are beating the Blue Cross rates. And because of that, well, now we're talking like that's legit how you do it. And so, but you need to get with your hospital friends because they're just as pissed at the carriers as you are. And so the hospitals and the first step for them, the like true proof point that sells this new network to their colleagues in the community, other employers in the community, is they put their own employees on this network. And once they did that, and remember, like they're going to give themselves good rates, right? So they really have good rates. And if they're willing to take those rates instead of the higher rates they get from United or whoever, Cigna, from these employers in order to be able to cut out those networks in their community, that's the long play. They really have to have their eye on the prize because, when I come to a hospital and I say, hey, I've got this little group of nuns, for instance, like, do you want to do a direct contract with me? And they're like, why? I can fill out my beds with higher paying Cigna patients or Blue Cross patients. Why would I give you a better deal? Why? And so they have to really think about the long game. If you create your own network where you're actually a competitor now with these entities that you're contracted with, because you're contracted with all these networks and now they're your competitor. If you really do that, you have to be willing to take better rates and worse rates for you, right? But the end game is that, like, think of all the billing bureaucracy that's out of the system and all the like annual negotiations or multi-year negotiations and the games of chicken with your community and your patients' lives that go on with those contract negotiations. Getting yourself out of that is worth it. And also, all your providers are going to get paid more if you're able to like pay your actual providers more, especially the specialty practices that actually aren't employed by your hospital. So like this network that I'm talking about in this Midwestern community, they went out, they had a contract with all these specialists and primary care docs because they didn't have it all in their hospitals. And also they had to go to regions of the local market where they didn't have a hospital or didn't have that specialty available at their hospital. So it really became a community thing. And everyone is seeing like, yes, let's get off the plantation, the network plantation, as I call it, because we have to build this underground railroad.
Is there any, and I got 2 questions, but I'll ask the first one. Is there any drawbacks to an organization going down this route?
Well, I have not seen the networks sufficiently able to beat this back in the community I'm looking at. And I don't think the networks really appreciate what's coming at them because their rates are a lot lower. And I'm like, I don't know why any employer, and they're the big hospital systems in town. They're not all of them, but there's some of them. There are enough of them. And so why would any employer pay Blue Cross or Aetna? Why? So I don't think these carriers see this coming at them, but it was provider led, and that it's like smart thinking providers, but they were the hospitals. They were the hospitals. Like if you're a small independent specialty practice, you either team up with hospitals in your town to create this local network, or you do like the let's work with the Chamber of Commerce type startup movement that I described earlier.
Sure. I mean, at the end of the day, no, I don't think I've ever heard anybody say I love my insurance. So, why wouldn't you want to check this out at least? But what do you see as a little mindset shift, so to speak, to be in an environment where just insurance has been the name of the game for, however long you're in healthcare. That's one thing that's constant. What would you say for people to either make the shift into, yeah, I'm going to do this, or for that person who's like, I'm going to kind of stick with what I know. What do you think's going on there? Like, what needs to actually happen to make people take the plunge, or what happens to the person who says, I'm good, sounds okay, but I'm going to stick with what I have?
They're not, most people are looking at the facts of their situation and they're making rational choices. So if you're talking about, a rheumatologist who needs like enough RA cases every year in order to justify like walking away from the volume they have, like, these are rational decisions for them to stay with the system that delivers them volume, right? Like they're kind of stuck unless they're part of a bigger movement. And so you don't have to actually make the decision to burn it all down all at once. You start the movement, right? You start having the monthly meetings, first with the provider community, right? And you start like crying on each other's shoulders and crying in each other's beer and like about telling each other your sorrows. And then one thing I would recommend is start going to the Health Rosetta summits, right? Every year. The next one's in Nashville. That's the organization that credentials benefits advisors like me who sell this kind of plan to employers and who help them build it. And so you go there and you get inspired, right? Because we have a bunch of employers and we have a bunch of providers and clinicians who are there, who are building these plans with us. And so you start hanging out with innovative-minded people. You bring them as speakers to your lunch and learns. Nobody's jumping off a cliff right now. You're just learning. You're gathering information. You're teaming up. You're getting to know everyone else in your community. And then maybe you like someone golfs with the CFO at the local hospital, and you start like putting a little bug in their ear. Hey, did you hear about this town that's doing the hospital built their own network? And you just start, what if we had a meeting with them? What if we had a call with them? Because, hey, for all I know, like that network, they built themselves and then they got bought by a reference-based pricing organization. Why? Because they're a regional network. Why does that synergy come together? They're a regional network. So what do you do for your enrollees who have college kids somewhere else or who are on vacation? You have to have solutions outside of your market, your local market. So the reference-based pricing people come in and they're the out-of-network solution, okay? Well, that reference-based pricing solution, they can go and they can like help you start it in another town, right? So if you've got a hospital or two, you don't necessarily have to build it from the ground up. There are vendors and organizations out there that could actually come alongside you and you could do it with them. And they've done it before. But you have to go to the right places to meet those people and to hear the stories and to get inspired. And then you just keep talking until you get a critical mass where people are like, all right, well, let's incorporate this nonprofit network, or let's incorporate this LLC or whatever it's going to be. And let's just have some articles of incorporation, and we'll just it's one step at a time, right? You don't have to dive off the, San Francisco Bridge right away.
Yeah. Love it. So now I kind of want to make a tiny shift, but this really kind of goes hand in hand, is just the aspect of patients and, how we're, maybe I think you kind of noted as outsourcing power of their own body, so to speak. So I want to know, maybe as we're making a shift here, is just the aspect of people relying on the system versus relying on maybe themselves and being the quarterback of their own health. So I guess my question would be, why do people rely so heavily? And then really, what would you like to see the general public start doing differently? Not even, regardless of just the medical system, but I guess like maybe it's a two-parter. Like, why do they rely on the system so much? And then what do you want to see from the general public going forward?
I think that it comes down to, in my mind, and your audience, this might trigger some people, but we are conditioned by a white coat religious cult, which really is this idea that we're trained in submission to this cult. And we have priests of the cult, and they go to seminaries and they get their priestly robes at the seminaries, and they come out and they are the authorities. And we are taught that they're the experts and we're not. And they have all these mystical and magical tools that we don't know anything about. And their tools are better than any tools we could come up with. And, they're like, and so that isn't how it is in every culture throughout all time. That is a modern invention that's less than a century old. And it is not necessarily the only way, but because of the history of allopathic medicine, that's like the Latin word, that medicine based on suppressing symptoms. So the history of allopathic medicine is that, like, this is what we do. We have drugs and we have surgeries, and these are our tools. And therefore, every condition we see in front of us, if it doesn't require a drug or surgery, like, we don't get paid. And if we can't fix it with the drug or surgery, the patient leaves. And so we have to increasingly have more drugs, more different types of surgeries. And that's the only way that we can manage this. And that's the way that we have been trained. We haven't been trained in any other way. Like, just think about the fact that there was this big policy revolution or big policy initiative in Washington whereby the HHS announced, yay, we're going to start, giving grants to medical schools to get them to commit to teaching nutrition in medical schools. And I'm like, wow, like, we're calling that a win, I guess. I guess it is. I mean, but holy crap, every day we give thumbnail type pills to people, and we say this little tiny pill is gonna fix these symptoms, and we don't talk to them about the 10 pounds that they're consuming all day in food and beverage that they've been consuming over their life that obviously has more impact on their health than whatever little thumbnail pill you're giving them today. And so, now that's not to say that pills can't be powerful. Of course they can, but what are they powerful at? Suppressing symptoms. So they're not curing you. They're not healing you. Even the most obvious thing that we think of as a cure, like an antibiotic, for instance. If you've like an antibiotic, for instance, if you've got an antibiotic, you're killing off the microbiome in order. It's like chemo, right? We're going to kill off everything your body's doing. Your body's not dumb. It's a biological system. It's doing things for a reason. And so for us to suppress symptoms, which are designed by God, by nature, to help you, to keep you alive, and they might be very uncomfortable and they might actually kill you, but we're suppressing them. What's going to happen? Our bodies are going to express the thing differently, or they're going to become weaker as a result of not being able to detoxify or not being able to do whatever they're trying to do. That's not to say we don't have surgery, we don't take tumors out for cancer or whatever. I'm not saying that at all. But when you're not in a life-threatening acute situation, this is a very novel idea that we go to this deep authority and we turn over all our agency and we submit to their mystical wisdom. And that part of it is not actually novel. There have always been medicine doctors and whatever, and healers and traditional healers. What's novel is that those people don't know anything about plants. They don't talk to you about your emotional state. They don't talk to you about your relationships. They don't look at your home and the state of it. Those people haven't studied almost anything that's actually driving your health. And so all they have is your lab numbers and your surgery and your drugs. So that's not to say those aren't important and useful tools. They are, and they can save lives. But for the things that are actually killing us today, most of us are not in an acute life-threatening situation. We're in a slow burn. And we're dying of things that are the complex of many, many factors in our lives. And most of those white coat doctors are not trained in. And the ones that even address them at all, address them only for a minute or two. And they don't have time to really address it. Some poor primary care doctor has 6 minutes with the patient. He don't have time. So they become the high price referral factory to some higher price testing and labs and diagnostics and, screens and scans that, bring in greater revenue to the hospital that owns them. They don't have time to actually be the doctors that they went. No one goes to school thinking I'm going to just, suppress people's symptoms until they die of the underlying disease that caused those symptoms in the first place. That's not why we go to school, to become a doctor. But it is what's happening. And so I think that one of the things that Secretary Kennedy was asked, I think during one of his confirmation hearings, is how do we lower the cost of healthcare? And he said, need less healthcare. And he wasn't wrong. And I think that to the extent that we really start to embrace the idea that the things that are causing our disease processes, hypertension itself is a symptom. Cholesterol, symptom, right? All these lab results, these are symptoms. Why is your body doing that? There's a reason. And so this root cause idea, and I'm very grateful that functional medicine and the idea of root cause medicine is getting more and more play. And even in the ortho space, right? Where it's maybe surgery isn't always necessary. Maybe actually a lot of emotional issues are driving pain. And maybe the sham surgery studies are showing us that actually placebo surgeries work just as well. What? There's totally challenging concepts for those of us who've dedicated our lives to the healthcare system to hear. But I've had to really come to grips with this in my own life, my own body, my own journey, my own sort of professional careers. Do I really want to enable this religious cult anymore? Or do I want to actually start to see everybody for the role they have to play and to really start to think about my patients as people who are far more than a bunch of lab numbers in front of me?
And it's a lot of it, like you said, is conditioning, especially in the sense of, God knows we're the only, I'll say this confidently, we're the only country that has just nonstop freaking pharmaceutical commercials that basically, right, like you said, say, hey, just take this pill and everything will be fine, instead of trying to figure out, all right, why do you have these symptoms to begin with? And I was just finding it interesting. We're living literally in the easiest time ever to access the most information we've ever been able to access. So there's no excuse for not being able to investigate out what should I be doing? What should I be eating? What's healthy eating? It's a novel concept, just to, move your body, get some exercise, and eat healthy foods is really simple to kind of find that out. But I think, like you said, people want to give it away and then, kind of have a blame game. So it's definitely number one, doing some research. But the other thing, the other thing you pointed out there too, though, that I could appreciate is some of the behind the scenes stuff that patients don't see. And, we talked about the primary care doctor having 6 minutes. Even my wife, it was about 6 or 8 weeks ago, she was just going through, not crazy, but she was having some issues trying to grow her hair. She's doing everything under the sun, natural as possible to grow her hair. And then she's doing her own research and finding out what could I be lacking in my blood? Maybe what's some minerals or microbes that I'm missing out on that are causing me to not be able to restore some hair growth. And she's going down this pathway and got some blood work. And then she comes home from the doctor one day and she's like, they didn't even know to look up my ferritin level or something, something nutrition based, like you mentioned. And I just sat down with them, I get the frustration, I get the anger, but can I just maybe help you understand what they're dealing with in terms of how quick this visit has to be, how much time they do or do not have to prep for you, the fact that most of them don't get any nutrition, and what you're describing is kind of in-depth nutrition. And she's then how are patients supposed to get better? I'm like, that's what the whole argument is. It's they don't have the time. They don't always have the knowledge base for what patients think they should have, or every doctor's a nutritionist, they're a workout specialist. They don't have that information. Doesn't mean they can't get the information after they graduate and can't learn it, but I get it. Like you said, I'm inundated Monday to Friday. Weekend, I just want to actually catch up on rest and spend time with my family. I get all that. So I love that you pointed that out. If people listen, it's just take some active participation in your own health. Don't leave it up to somebody else to fix you, but just ask the right questions, because I think it also goes into making sure that when you do see either a specialist or you're going to see a doctor or a medical professional or provider, is just go in there with some healthy skepticism, but ask good questions, do some research a little bit beforehand. Don't think that everybody's out to get you, because to your point, you mentioned multiple times, there are a ton of good people that are practicing in healthcare and medicine. that all they really care about is just helping patients. So it's just making sure you're going in there and not being pessimistic like some of us are. Last thing I want to ask you, walking away from this, what is one thing a private organization should do first thing tomorrow to get some control in their practice and get some control with the insurance and their reimbursements?
The first thing I would say is to take a hard look at your cash self-pay price and make it competitive. Like, think it through. And then start letting people know about it, advertise it on the wall. And if you have anyone that you know who is an employer or who is an HR leader, you can let them know, like, hey, we take cash and we're happy to take cash from you. And, we'll give you a good discount for it. That's the first thing, is because a lot of people, they have to program their software and they're like billing people and their EHRs. Like, a lot of people need to do a little bit of IT work at their office to even be able to manage that well. Like, gosh, maybe you want to get a different credit card processor, right? Because like you're getting pillaged on fees. And so like think through, what would it look like if we started marketing to the cash pay environment? I would also get to know your local churches in your communities, because many of them have members of healthcare sharing ministries in their communities. And you might reach out to the healthcare sharing ministries and make sure that they are like that you're on their provider list, their provider directory, as friendly to cash. So just putting yourself out there as a cash friendly practice is really important.
Love it. So what I want to do is, anybody's listening, if you listen to this and you had your eyes open or you say, I want to start this pathway, I'm going to drop, all of Katy's, resources, where to contact in the show notes. So definitely get with that. Can I get a consult? Like, how would you say, like, consultation with you? What would be the best thing for somebody to do if they're like, I'm interested, but I don't know what the hell I'm doing?
Well, I haven't not in the past worked with clinician practices typically, but I work with employers. So if there's an employer out there, and that sometimes includes the practices as employers, if there's an employer out there that wants to build like a health plan like this, for sure, you can reach out to me. I write at katytalento.com. And so my paid subscribers get an email address. My company is All Better Health, and you can reach me there through our contact form on our webpage at allbetter.health.
Katy, this was amazing. I swear I could probably go for at least a few more hours, Joe Rogan style, but, for time's sake, appreciate the time, insane knowledge. Love the personality too. Make it so easy for people to digest it. So just great for being on. Really appreciate it. Guys, we'll see you next time. Take care.